Wingless Dreamer presents How to Tackle Plot. Plot, storyline, narrative, whatever you call it, it's one of the most difficult things to plan out when creating a story. Be it a long one, like the average length of a Tolstoy novel, or a short one, a one pager, a story that ends within the four digits, as in under 10,000 words. But plot is rather simple when you consider it a bit mathematically, like a formula, or like a Rubik's Cube that you need to solve. It has steps, it has several methods of ending up at the right answer, which is telling the story that you want to tell. No one method is right when planning how your story is going to play out, but there are popular methods of planning. Today we're going to look at one of those methods, which is Freytag's Pyramid. Now, first of all, who is Freytag? Gustav Freytag was a German novelist and playwright famous for writing realistic stories centered around the lives of the middle classes. His work was influenced by English writers known for their realism like Charles Dickens. He was also a lecturer of German literature. He developed the plot model, which is now called the Freytag's Pyramid or the three-act story structure. So the three-act story structure defines 3 points in the story: the inciting incident, the climax, and the resolution. But these are just the main events of the story. In between this comes exposition, rising action, and falling action. Each act includes one major plot point. So let's look at those. The first act. This includes the exposition and the inciting incident. Exposition involves all of the world building and the description of the status quo, the basic information about the surroundings of the character, their life, and a few of the other characters around them. Typically, the characters introduced in these scenes are minor characters unless the story requires them to be major characters. For example, say the protagonist is in love with their childhood best friend who hangs around their house a lot. So this would include the love interest in the exposition as a part of the protagonist's daily life. The inciting incident is what marks the first change in the status quo. It doesn't have to be a real physical incident, but it usually is. First meetings in romances or the murder of a father in the fantasy, which becomes the reason for the hero to lead the quest. It's a bit of an absurd example, but the general principle is that the inciting incident is something that, well, incites things. It marks the first event in a series of changes to the status quo that will make up the plot. The second act. The second act begins with the rising action. Now that the plot has been set in motion by the inciting incident, it sort of begins unraveling the status quo, like a string of domino pieces knocking into each other. For example, in the Beauty and the Beast movie, the inciting incident would be Belle's father meeting the Beast, and the action begins from then. The subsequent events, up until Belle finally falls in love with the Beast, can be categorized under the rising action. And the climax would be Belle finding out about her father's predicament back in the village and being let free from the castle. The climax is basically the final boss of turning points. It's the point in the story when the protagonist is faced with their desires, their fears, and must reconsider their desire. The climax usually results in the most visible conflict of the character's desires and fears. For example, the Beast, at the moment of the climax after the ball, is wrestling with the decision of wanting to imprison Belle and hoping that she'll fall in love with him to break him out of his curse, and wanting Belle to have the life she wants, regardless of his fear of being turned into a beast forever due to his curse. The third act. The third act now descends into chaos. All of the epic battles in every story are fought in this arc. The protagonist is in an internal conflict with their desire and fear, and sometimes also in an external conflict with the characters around them. But it's not always about sword fighting. For instance, in most contemporary romances, there's no particular person to be fought. But say in the first book of Jenny Han's trilogy series, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, the climax is the infamous hot tub kiss between Lara Jean and Peter, and the day after it as well, when the main antagonist, Jen, makes Lara Jean believe that Peter doesn't care enough about her. And now here begins the falling action, the aftermath of the climax. Thinking that her fear of being second best has come true, Lara Jean breaks up with Peter, and in a confrontation that follows later, all of the secrets that Lara Jean was trying to keep are revealed, and she is living her nightmare. the exact thing she had been striving to avoid for the length of the plot. And then comes the resolution, the very end of the journey of the change of the status quo. This can be referred to as a creation of a new status quo, one which is based on the character overcoming their fear and gaining their desire. That is, if we're rooting for the protagonist to go get whatever it is they want. If the point of the story is to end in a tragedy, then the resolution would result in the winning of the character's fears, and thus their subsequent fall. But we've been talking about the quintessential Bildungsroman so far, so let's keep talking about it. A perfect example of the summed up resolution is Jane Eyre's infamous Reader, I Married Him. It has taken Jane winning over her fear of losing her intellectual equal status with Rochester and several other borderline unbelievable events happening that make it really easy for Jane to be on equal terms with Rochester, of course. But Jane Eyre is a romantic novel, so this creates a new status quo. Jane is now Rochester's wife, his equal in position and funds, and they live happily ever after. The resolution is sometimes followed by an epilogue, which has the same characteristics. We can call it an extended resolution. So, well, that's just one way to cook up a planned story. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe.